Good evening and welcome to Legal Tech Live, episode 99. I'm your host, Nick Rishwain, and we are here tonight. We're talking Regtech tonight, or this morning for Anthony. Our guest is Anthony Stevens. He is the CEO of 6clicks.io, also just 6clicks. The website is 6clicks.io. Anthony is founder and CEO of also a founder and CEO of Digital Asset Ventures, an author of Chasing Digital, a playbook for the new economy, co-founder of several startups, and former partner and chief digital officer at KPMG. So you certainly have the digital chops for a Regtech and compliance and risk management startup. And our guest host tonight is Josh Jackson. Josh is currently the executive director of the AI Association, and that's out of Atlanta, Georgia, correct, Josh?
Washington, D.C.
Oh, you're out of D.C. Oh, you've got friends from Georgia.
Oh,
Where are you from?
Yeah. Well, Emory Law.
Emory Law.
So
And
yeah.
Alum of Emory Law, and he's located in Washington, D.C. now. Friends in Atlanta Legal Tech, or ATL Legal Tech, who should be watching tonight. And Anthony, tell us, what is 6clicks? How did you get to where you're at today? How did 6clicks come to be, and what does 6clicks do?
Thanks, Nick. So I'll share a little bit of a story. Obviously, we founded 6clicks, myself and Louis and Andrew, basically 18 months ago, so the start of 2019. And I'll share a bit more about sort of what we're doing and the problem we're solving in more detail. But to go back a little bit, I was formerly at KPMG as a partner there, and as you introduced me as Chief Digital Officer, and I guess I saw and really started to understand in a lot of detail the fact that the industry, there's obviously a lot of advisors out there, legal advisors, accountants, consultants, that help businesses around the world with issues to do with risk and compliance. And what I felt and saw was that there was a gap in the market for technology that they could use, as well as really innovative, groundbreaking technology to help support better outcomes around risk and compliance itself for businesses. So I solved a number of problems at KPMG, thinking about risk and compliance that were fascinating. I think really pushed the boundaries, but saw in the market, as I said, there was a sort of significant gap for technology that was particularly innovative and a platform to help better connect advisors with enterprise and business customers. So that's what we set out to do. Started last year. We started, I guess, as many startups do, cutting code and sitting in the figurative garage, thinking about what the problem was that we wanted to solve in the first instance. We set out, in actual fact, thinking about supply chain risk, right? And the cybersecurity use case. And for a lot of businesses, I think we've seen the last few years in particular, that problem is alive and well for so many businesses around the world. So initial use case that we built our platform to try and help with was cybersecurity supply chain risk. And we nailed that pretty early on, and then did an acquisition towards the end of last year of a business that had a whole heap of more capability around risk and compliance. Again, sort of focused largely on the cyber use case. And now, like sort of more recently in the last 6 months, we've focused a lot more heavily on compliance as a use case, and I can drill into a bit more of that. We've had some exciting announcements around artificial intelligence and stuff like that recently.
Certainly. Hey, we've got the director of the AI Association here, so we should touch on some artificial intelligence while we're at it. But yeah, tell us a little bit about the use cases on compliance, because this is a legal tech show. Oftentimes we're talking straight, servicing law firms or servicing legal customers. Tell us about your service on the compliance risk.
Yeah, got it.
Risk
so
management.
Sure. We think about I mean, the nomenclature in this space is obviously where people get, from my experience, quite often people get caught just understanding what are we talking about when we're talking about compliance. We think about compliance from the point of view of a business needing to think about a bunch of external requirements that they need to align with or be compliant to. We call those things authorities, right? So authorities being a sort of a catch-all for standards, laws, regulations, anything that is sort of in the public domain, I guess, that people need to take into account. The thing that we've done with our web-based platform is we've built a solution that allows companies to take an internal control or a way or a policy that they've got, and then map that back to one or many underlying authorities. And we ingest authorities, so we ingest all the standards, laws, regulations into our platform. We do that maintaining the metadata and the construct of those underlying standards, laws, or regulations. And as I said, we create a mechanism that's really easy to use that that people can use to connect policies with underlying authorities. So that's the first step. We've then we actually set out, Nick, at the back of 2019, so sort of 12 months ago, just about working with a bunch of PhDs to think about how we could sort of bring artificial intelligence into this mix. And so the first problem that we sought to solve was acknowledging the fact that many of these authorities have got overlap, right? That's the key thing to recognise. And I think anyone who's been in law or compliance or risk would recognise that there's so many different things that businesses need to think about externally, and quite often there's huge overlaps between those things, right? Unfortunately, the way that we've set up regulation and laws around the world means that there's just not one clean set for everyone in the world. I mean, that goes without saying. And globally, you know, we see these themes like take privacy, for example. Obviously, we saw the European market think about privacy and put in place things like GDPR really early on. And then we can see now in more recent times, the States and other parts of the world start to legislate and put in regulation around privacy. Canada and, you know, everyone's coming to the party, but the fact is that not everyone does it at the same time, and not everyone enforces those sorts of things in the same way. The themes are the same, but the way in which it goes about is different. So what we thought is we need a system that the artificial intelligence, I'm coming back to you here, the artificial intelligence, what we wanted to do was sort of solve two things initially, and I think we've done that. One is to have the artificial intelligence actually understand the authorities themselves and understand them to the extent at which the words that make up those regulations or standards or laws it can be interpreted for us to then do something with. Now, it's really important to get that right, because if you haven't got that right, then you know, any computer system's going to confuse things. And the classic case we use internally when we're thinking about it is, if you take the word storage, right, and you're talking about cybersecurity, people think, okay, storage, therefore we're talking about computers and we're thinking about disk storage and stuff like that. Whereas if you think about something like, if you use the word storage and apply it to the world of logistics or shipping, then obviously people's thinking about the square footage on a container ship or something like that, right? So the system's got to understand that, and interestingly, you know, there's a test out there. It's a sort of academic test called, you can look it up, called Buffalo, right? Which is technically, if you think about the word buffalo, it can be strung together. The same word can be used in a sentence, and that sentence still makes sense. And I'll you know, if I try and explain it, there's buffalo, obviously the animal, there's buffalo, the state, you know, the city, blah, blah, blah. So if you string this sentence together, it doesn't really mean, it's a bit stupid, right? But it's still grammatically correct. And it's a test that's used quite often in artificial intelligence that computers unravel and establish meaning associated with something like that. So anyway, back to sort of what we've done. We've taken these standards, laws, or regulations, and we've applied natural language processing techniques in artificial intelligence to understand them. And then we've then set out, using machine learning, a capability to compare provisions within one standard law and regulation and find the similarity in another, and doing that with a degree of confidence. Right. So you can imagine at the moment, Nick, lawyers or accountants or professionals would do this manually, right? They would sit
Right.
there and trawl through documents and try and say, okay, there's something that obligates companies to do X, Y, and Z, and then there's some other authority, and they've got to look at that and work out,
Yeah, you'd have to
inevitably
cross-reference one.
cross-referencing.
Yeah.
And so we saw, firsthand, like, what is it that companies do today is they have these spreadsheets, right? There's spreadsheets from hell, right, with lots of different tabs and all these different cross references to try and work out what relates to what. And we've now built an artificial intelligence engine. We call it Haley. So it's got a name that essentially does exactly that. You can ingest any authorities. The model can be trained based on specific domains or for a specific company or industry. And she provides matching effectively of separate provisions across different authorities. What's key though is, especially around artificial intelligence, there's lots of sensitivity with machines doing too much, right? We don't want them to overtake this stuff and be too assumptive.
Right.
So we've also got a feedback loop that's built into Haley.
So how are we spelling Haley, by the way? I love that artificial intelligence companies are naming their systems. So how do we spell that for the listeners?
We spell Haley Hailey.
Okay.
So
just
coincidentally, we've got an A and an I in between the H and the L.
Right. I've got to know. What's the back? Is there a backstory on that? Is it a?
Well, I'll tell you what the backstory. The backstory is, names in startup technology world, as you know, there's like everyone's tries to give something a name.
Sure.
We thought of Clara. We thought of Evie. We thought of there was a whole heap of a whole short list that we went through, and we landed on Haley just to have something that was kind of cool, strong, confident, forward-looking, techie in a way, but relatable as well. So anyway, it's kind of working.
Okay, good. All right.
I think it's good. So that's our compliance. So what we've done with the artificial intelligence engine was kind of bake that into our web-based system, so that people can look at two different authorities, get prompted on the similarity between provisions, acknowledge that, so create a feedback loop back to Haley that reinforces the learning, and then use that to basically store and manage a compliance map.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we're up to at the moment.
That's what you're up to at the moment. Josh, feel free to jump in and direct it where the stuff that you think is really cool that's happening here and how it's applicable. So you're up.
I'm up. Well, Anthony knows this, and I've told you a little bit more about this too, Nick, is the excitement, I think, from the legal community in this regulation space is most people in the legal community don't like the regulations, right? It doesn't fit as the case law might fit in their mind, and regulations is kind of like that stepchild, right? To use that analogy of, we don't like the stepchild, so we're going to kind of push it to the side and see what happens. And so what I think is neat is the complexity of regulations that are put in there, and now the system is helping ease some of that time constraint for the legal community, but also the sort of the business in the industry, to create better decision making. And I think that's what's exciting about six clicks for me is that when I first met Anthony and kind of looked through it, was this notion of they're thinking about the end user, right? And a lot of times we kind of like look at legal tech or Regtech, and we think about it from a technology perspective and less of like the end user. And I think, you know, Anthony should just tell the story a little bit about, you know, your tech team was, or Andrew, right, was carrying around sort of that
Yeah.
spreadsheet and like trying to punch things in. I think it's just it's a neat story to tell.
Right. Yeah. So Andrew's one of the founders of Six Clicks, and he spent the last 20 years of his career in sort of cybersecurity space. He used to work for the Australian Signals Directorate, and you know, it's a really high profile guy consulting to organisations around cybersecurity maturity and ISO 27001 and NIST and all this kind of stuff. And he carries around, or he carried around, I think that's the key point. He carried around this spreadsheet that he called hell, right? Which is literally sort of, you know, I can probably even share. I can probably even bring it up on the screen in a tick. Um, he carries around this spreadsheet that he calls hell, and it has a mapping of all of the different cybersecurity standards around the world, and you know, hundreds of tabs. And just to maintain this thing is almost a full-time job, right? And interestingly, if you go and ask a whole heap of folk about, like in the cybersecurity space in particular, do they have such a thing? They all have the same thing, right? But inevitably, all these standards and laws change all the time, right? So they're forever updating these things. And then people ask the question, which happens all the time, as a business, we want to improve our cybersecurity maturity. Can we perhaps, you know, be compliant with, say, ISO 27001? And inevitably, when they've done that, they say, "Oh, that's great. We've achieved that outcome. What can we now do? Are we also compliant with NIST cybersecurity framework, right? Which is sort of, you know, an equivalent, or, you know, to some extent, there's some overlap, but you know, that's the trick. Let me see. Actually, I've got it here. I'm going to share it, Nick, if I can
Please
share.
do.
I just think
And
your
while you're
viewers, I can't tell.
yeah, I'm drunk
You
with
have to
power. I forgot. I
you
haven't
have to
done
turn
that.
me on.
Yeah,
I'm like, I'm shackled.
I do. This is how I do it. I'm drunk with power here. Let's see. Did that? You
All
got
right.
it?
Can you guys
And
see that?
Yeah, you can see it.
Yeah, Ripper. So this is literally what Andrew carried around for a decade, and this is the problem we're looking to solve. Is you've got a whole heap of control references on the left-hand side, and then you've got, like, if I just run through these, like VPDSS is a state within Australia. There's Victoria. It's a cybersecurity standard that relates to things that companies need to have in place in order to do business with the government, essentially. Then we've got PCI DSS, which everyone knows around the world. It's related to sort of, you know, people think about it in the context of personal information and credit cards and all that kind of stuff. We then have ISM, which is an Australian national standard. Um, um, and then we have PSPF, and then NIST, which is out of the NIST cybersecurity framework. And you can see what Andrew's trying to do here is map all these things, and he's got control libraries and lookups. Basically, that's it. We have built technology that basically completely replaces this. And you can imagine that's kind of like database driven, and there's an awesome user experience that supports that. But then Haley comes along and it basically identifies all those mappings in minutes, in seconds, right? And that's the trick, right? So you can then ingest some other standard, and she picks up all of that and does that mapping straight away as well.
Excellent. And we do have a question from Cami Lopez, who's a former guest of the show and a startup founder herself. And she asks, and it's a fair question, were there any male names considered for Haley?
Male names. Now let me think. I look, I reckon there was. If we went, like, we're certainly not discriminating in that sense. I don't think it was Bill or Ken.
Right.
I don't know.
Wasn't catchy enough with Bill or
Like,
Ken.
we want something like you've got to get something that's sort of, yeah, like,
Modern and catchy and
yeah, right,
yeah.
contemporary. But at the same time, we didn't want to put Apple or Orange or like it's got to
Right.
be contemporary, but not off the charts.
Right. Right.
So I think, look, I think that to be fair, I think there was a couple of candidates there that were male, but I can't remember
Oh,
exactly.
right. No,
Anyway, we landed with Haley.
we landed
Okay.
with Haley. Excellent. So this is fascinating that you've made this essentially easier to work with. Tell me, I want to move because we only have a short time with you and you guys have a wide variety of solutions that you offer. Maybe one that I thought was certainly that caught my attention was your slavery rules. I'm sorry,
Right.
modern slavery compliance. Now that it gets a lot of attention from the legal community, but it is essentially for supply chains and making sure a supply chain is not employing the wrong vendor is how I'm understanding it. Is that correct? Let's dig into that.
Yeah, look, there was law that was passed in Australia. There's equivalent stuff around the world in 2018 that means that for businesses with turnover of more than 50 or 100 million, they've basically got to produce a statement at the end of each year that sets out the fact that they're compliant. Their supply chain is healthy when it comes to modern slavery. Obviously, no one wants to do business with companies that have got
child
examples
labor,
of slavery in there. Yeah, of course, it's terrible stuff, and but it can happen, especially in the supply chain. You don't realize that in actual fact you're doing business with company X. Company X subcontracts to company Y. Company Y subcontracts to company Z, and within that little mix, there's examples of modern slavery. So the interesting thing in that space is that depending on the geography of where you source a product and the nature of the product or service itself, it can lend itself to a higher risk profile associated with modern slavery. For example, in Congo, they mine nickel, and nickel is a key input to the manufacturing of batteries. So if you're sourcing batteries out of Congo, unfortunately the nickel mines in Congo, I believe there is reasonably high rates of child labour and modern slavery. So I think what our system allows companies to do is effectively do an analysis of all, or use the system to capture information about all the companies in the supply chain, and then conduct electronically effectively a risk assessment. And the risk assessment goes out, people respond to that, all the data gets collected in our system for them to analyse. But importantly, the risk assessment can be mapped back to the company's policy, or alternatively directly back to the legislation. So again, this key point around compliance, Nick, is getting the traceability from the assessment that gets conducted right through to the underlying standard law or regulation that relates to whatever the problem is, or the policy that the company's got in place.
Excellent. Josh, jump in.
Yeah. So in this case, I think what's interesting, and this is a question for you, Anthony, is this is ethics on sort of the outside. And in terms of artificial intelligence, the conversation on my end keeps coming up. How do you think about ethics internally, right? Inside the AI, and have you thought about that from 6 Clicks perspective?
I'm fascinated by this topic. I think the world of ethics and artificial intelligence is going to be a really big challenge. In actual fact, I remember when I was back at KPMG, it was a topic that we started to explore around the suitability, or how do you apply artificial intelligence, especially in areas of where there's a lot of judgment typically that's taken place, like areas of law or, decisioning. The way we think about it internally is that we want companies to automate their risk and compliance activities, and we want them to. We think that's a good thing because it's costly and it allows the businesses to get on and do more stuff, right? Solve problems related to whatever their business is. At the same time, we need to make sure that we're not solving the problem to such an extent that we're assuming an element of judgment, right? We're assuming that that there's some mapping or compliance obligation that's got a tick next to it that Haley has identified, and the company, in its interest to automate the bejesus out of everything, just overlooks that and takes it for granted. So we build a we're building a fire we're building it so that Haley is effectively a decision support system. She's helping accelerate and work through a lot of the administrative process and get to outcome a lot faster. And the sort of case study that we've got here is, back to Andrew's spreadsheet. Ordinarily someone would spend weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, months getting to a point at which they've got that ready to be used. Haley accelerates that point, but then we still leave the ultimate mapping and confirmation of that mapping to a professional within the system. So we try and just go fall short of actually making that connection directly. So I think that's the way we're thinking at the moment. The other thing that is coming up, we're working with a business in Singapore, and they're actually advising businesses on how to think about risk associated with the adoption of artificial intelligence. So they're using our platform to actually conduct risk assessments, to think about how artificial intelligence is being applied to their business. Nothing to do with Haley, but something else itself. And I think that's going to continue to emerge. There'll be more regulation and guidance out there as to the role of artificial intelligence. And I think we're going to start to see regulators step up continuously to put in place some guardrails around it. It's an endless debate though, because I think the capability, especially with cloud computing and the algorithms that have been developed and the research that's taking place, is outpacing, as you would expect, is outpacing the regulators. So you're in this sort of situation at the moment where I think people have to be really conscious about what they're doing, and that's certainly what we are trying to do. But what are your thoughts, Josh?
Yeah, I want to hold you right there for a second, Josh, because Kimberly Bennett did join, and she said this modern slavery compliance tool might be good for some of her clients. So that is very interesting. Go ahead, Josh, but I wanted to let you know that she is watching us.
Oh, great! So
That's
I'm
cool.
gonna have a lot of.
So she can white label our platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting, this isn't part of your business model, but in terms of ethics and looking at the ethics behind regulations for those like Kimberly or anyone in this sort of the access to justice space, the technology being able to look at regulations and kind of map some of these ethical concerns, say, especially in the United States, to housing regulations, and being able to maybe tag this was the decision that was made, and it was based on maybe an unethical decision, right?
Right.
Or a bias and discriminatory regulation for the population at a certain time. So that's just my brainstorming thought from outside the business model, but from an ethical sort of standpoint.
Are you thinking of ways to apply this to our current crisis with evictions? Are you thinking in that aspect, Josh?
Yeah, I think that's one major aspect.
Yeah.
The plus then you have like the tax added in there, and who's being labeled a certain way. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, look,
Put him on the spot,
I
Josh.
don't know too much about the housing eviction stuff in the States, but the thing that I look at the artificial intelligence from another point of view, and that is everyone's seen poor attempts at artificial intelligence, right? And the easy way to spot natural language processing that doesn't work is you look at something and the artificial intelligence engine has said this is the same as that, and it takes you a nanosecond as a human to realize that the context has been mixed. Like we've all seen this problem, right? Or at least, you know, you kind of look at some of these things, and that's been the bit that we've been grappling with internally. Does it pass the sniff test? Does Haley pass the sniff test? Is she matching things up in the same way that a human would, taking into account context? And you know, the lesson we learned is that we initially set out to build the underlying algorithms for risk and compliance generally, right? We said, okay, let's solve risk and compliance problems. Let's try and build a generic model that can scale to tackle anything, which I suppose is ambitious, but we ended up sort of pulling right back from that and training Haley specifically on a particular domain. And I think what's going to happen, Josh, just sort of bounce off your concept, is that some of these artificial intelligence capabilities are going to have more and more effective training that relate to specific problems they're trying to solve, right? Not just some sort of monolithic all-purpose vehicle, but maybe in the areas of identifying language or issues of ethical concern, the AI engines have got greater feedback loops, or you know, are built in a different way that that allows the context to be handled with kit gloves as distinct from broad brushstrokes. Anyway, that's the way I'm thinking about it at the moment.
Interesting. And another friend of ours from Georgia, Georgia is showing up strong tonight with Kim Bennett in the house, and Ashley Pepitone mentioned
already, Nick.
Yeah. Ashley Pepitone, friend of ours, a friend of the show, Ashley Pepitone says this could be used, could be beneficial, this type of compliance usage in the mortgage industry, whereas the eviction had kind of popped into my mind. But and then she asks the question, have you done anything with the pharmaceutical industry? And she says Josh knows why she's asking this. Has 6 Clicks had any use cases in the pharmaceutical industry?
We are exploring. Actually, we've been dragged into some of that in Middle East, India market. There's, you know, we've one of our team is in that market at the moment and currently exploring a number of use cases in the pharma sector. So, like, I think that's alive and well. There's a lot of regulation in the medical pharma space that I think we could have a huge impact on automating or at least streamlining. So yeah, definitely see that use case as one that we will continue to tackle. It's early days for us at the moment, but I think that's going to be alive and well 2021 for sure.
Excellent. So
I'd like to hear about any one of those folk that's got ideas there. Then reach out, please.
Excellent. And Sujesh has he says this is very cool concepts. How important do you think auditability is going to be, as one question? And then his second follow-up to that is either as insurance against claims or from a regulatory perspective.
Yeah, the concept of audit we actually thought about right from the very outset when we designed the 6 Clicks platform, and we baked into the tool actually something we call 6 Clicks compliance proof. So when you're running an assessment and then you know 9 months down the track, you need to prove to a regulator that you actually undertook that assessment, which you can imagine is a common case, especially if there's litigation or there's something's gone wrong.
Sure.
You know, the company needs to come forward and say, actually, we did ask these questions. We did try to satisfy ourselves that we were doing the right thing or that the right processes were in place. So we designed and built this thing called 6 Clicks compliance proof. which is effectively where we write off to a blockchain and we apply a Merkle tree algorithm to take all of the evidence associated with an assessment at a point in time, write that off to a blockchain, and that creates obviously those who are familiar with the blockchain technology, an immutable record. So in other words, something that stands the test of time in terms of if it gets changed, then it's obvious that it gets changed. So we did that, and I think that's going to be an increasing theme, particularly around cyber or for insurance companies to say, look, we understand stuff went wrong and you've got a claim, but you represented to us that you were compliant with X, Y, or Z. Did you actually test that? Was that done? And so our platform can help support that kind of use case.
Excellent. Josh, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, to go back to Ashley's comment about pharmaceutical, I think we've talked a lot about, especially in the DC area from a policy perspective, is the logistics even behind, say, the vaccine. And so transportation of medical supplies and looking at the regulations there from the pharmaceutical aspect or just general healthcare. So there's a lot of overlap as we talk about sort of the overlap in things with logistics from the supply chain itself, but also just from transportation, right? Airline industry to automobiles, and this kind of feeds right into the AI with autonomous vehicles. So there's so much happening and what is overlapping in that. And that's what I keep coming back to, is all of these overlaps and then being able to say this regulation applies and this regulation doesn't. So I mean, that's where I'm approaching sort of this pharmaceutical healthcare area.
Excellent.
I think I was just going to jump in and just bounce off that autonomous vehicles concept, Josh. The other thing we've been working on and thinking about is what's referred to by some as like continuous compliance or automated compliance checking. So most of it's done at the moment where you're testing a control and a human's got to validate something, like is stuff working, or there's some KPIs they've got to validate against to say, yep, thumbs up or some thumbs down. What we want to do with our platform is ultimately tap it straight into the point in the product or service that's being delivered that would demonstrate that compliance is in actual fact in place. And so if you think about autonomous vehicles, you might have a regulation that says cars are limited to only drive over 100 miles an hour or 60 miles or whatever it is. And so we want to basically build a series of APIs that can then test for compliance, bring the results back, and sort of indicate therefore whether something's as it should be or not.
Yeah,
so that's kind of cool concept as well.
That is, and I have a friend who's very active in the autonomous vehicle space who would have some interesting inputs here for you. She's getting a PhD in Germany right now, and I'll give her a shout out, Liza Dixon, as well, and we can put you in touch with her for some future communications on this. And Ashley says, bingo, Josh, tracking and tracing from the manufacturing all the way to the distribution was her aspect. And there are some smart contract ways to follow these things in the supply chain currently, are there not? And Anthony?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's the intersection of risk compliance, artificial intelligence, and smart contracting is like, if you just sort of map that out as a diagram,
right.
The sweet spot in the middle is really, really cool.
Right.
Especially, the other thing I've been fascinated about, like just in my career, I didn't practice as a lawyer. I studied a bit of law early on, but I've always thought that they call it the holy grail of law, is to get to the point at which the law itself can be codified and then baked into smart contracts. Now, I think, we're probably miles away from that. But what we're trying to do on the AI front is at least to get the first step there, is to say, can a system understand the context and the meaning of some of this stuff to the point at which it can make parallel observations. But yeah, look, I think there's so much innovation and opportunity, especially when you start mashing together, blockchain, smart contracts, SaaS platforms,
Yeah.
AI. It's cool.
A lot of fascinating stuff here. So we're at about 45 minutes. I don't want to keep you all day, but tell us, what do you have coming up that's really interesting? What's really got you excited? Something that you may want to share with. You've got some folks watching live, and if we haven't covered anything live, for replay viewers or listeners on the podcast, what do they need to know about 6 Clicks that maybe we haven't covered? Because it's obviously you have several solutions. It's hard to cover it all in such a short time.
That's right. Thanks. I've got two things I thought I'd share in that to answer that question. First is our platform has been designed to be used by advisors as well as businesses. And so advisors can white label the platform, build managed services and capability around it that helps them get a sort of digital channel between themselves and their businesses, or their clients that they're serving. So that's something we're certainly seeing huge amounts of uptake around the world, and very exciting for us. The other thing, when we're talking about artificial intelligence, what I didn't mention, and probably is time to mention, is the fact that we've built that capability into our SaaS platform, into our web-based application and mobile app. But we're also planning to release that in very short order, probably next month, as an API. And the reason why that's really exciting is it means that big businesses or regulators or enterprises around the world with existing systems can then get access to that intelligence and capability without necessarily having to rip and replace other systems that they've already got in place. So that's really cool, and we'll release that a series of APIs progressively. We're going to start with what we call our compliance API, which does what we were talking about at the start of your show. And then we'll extend that out to risk-based capability that we're building out, and then circle back to compliance as well, and introduce more capability there. So that's what's in store for us over the next couple of months. I'd love to hear it from any of your listeners.
Yeah, and Josh, you have any last questions for Anthony before I tell him where everybody can before I ask him to share where people can get in touch with them?
Oh no, I mean, I think this has been great to hear more about the company, and then just all the exciting news. I mean, I think the speed, and maybe other people in the audience that are watching, the speed to kind of maybe talk a little bit about the speed to go from July 2019 to now, and getting some of this going, just how small and agile the team was, or how big it was to get to this point.
That's a good, this is pretty much a startup show. So tell us a little bit about that. We got kind of in the weeds there on the compliance stuff, but give us a little bit of the startup journey. How big was the team?
Yeah, look, Louis and I started, at the start of last year. So January, February, started, cutting code, as they say, and, endless amounts of whiteboarding. And we then raised capital, like a little angel round, in July last year, which was great. That kicked us on. We started selling towards the back half of last calendar year. Then we did a little acquisition at that point, started ramping up at the start of this year. We're now just about to set up in the UK market, and no doubt soon in the US market as well. So we've got engineering team, total team is sort of pushing up over 20 now. And we've closed some great deals with global brands. Things are going really well. So I still think of us as a startup, because there's just so much opportunity out there, right? We're just looking at the innovation that we can apply to this risk and compliance space. And that's ultimately why service providers are working with us, consultants, lawyers, etc. Because they're saying, how do we take that innovation and share that with clients and embed our intellectual property into the platform, which they can do with a 6 clicks solution.
Yeah,
and
that's
and I
great.
get one last thing is that,
Sure.
and what I think, to sum up how I see Anthony working here and with the team, is this market-driven mentality with the entrepreneurial spirit from the team is the thing that kind of like had the momentum to push forward. So because I know we talk a lot about in this sort of legal tech space is, well, how am I going to do it with 1 or 2 people, and how do I grow so fast? And I think it's having the entrepreneurial spirit with the market drive,
Yeah.
which I think Anthony's done so well.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's. I mean, that is really impressive growth for a company from a couple of people last year to now 20. You know, in 18 months. That's really impressive. So, Anthony, where do people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about 6 Clicks?
Yeah, look, I mean, head to our website, 6clicks.io. There's tons of stuff there, or drop me an email, Anthony at 6clicks.io. Yeah, I think that's, I'd love to hear from anyone.
That's great. Hey, you know, and I didn't ask, how did 6 Clicks get its
Bloody
name?
good question.
Yeah.
Good question, Nick. So, I was waiting for that. I'm pleased you asked. Louis and I, we were sitting, actually where I'm sitting right now, back March, April last year, trying to sort of nail out a name. It's a very tough process, right? And what we were focused on at the time was said we have to make this system really, really easy to use, right? Like, because there's so much stuff out there that just like sucks in terms of usability. We've got to
Yes.
make it easy to use. And we had a design objective such that when you send an assessment in our platform to a third party, supply chain thing that we were talking about earlier, we wanted to make sure that literally the number of clicks in the system was as small as possible. And I said, I think Louis said, we've got a design constraint, and that we've got to make it 6 clicks or less. And so we said, you know what, that's got to underpin our business. We've got to make sure that we always push to make this as easy as possible. And so we said, let's make that the name of the business. So
I like it. I figured it was, how do we make this as easy as it goes?
Yeah, how do we make it as easy as possible? And 6 clicks is not a lot, right?
No, it's not. It's relatively small.
Realistically.
Yeah.
So
Josh,
that's what we push for.
I like it. Josh, how do listeners, viewers, replay viewers, how do they get in touch with you if they want to learn more about the AI Association?
Yeah, drop me an email, joshj@theaiassociation.org.
All right. Anywhere else? You're pretty active in the legal tech community on Facebook. I see you there once in a while, so they can get in touch with him there as well. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for this. That's Anthony Stevens. You can find him at 6clicks.io. Anthony at 6clicks.io, and Josh Jackson was our co-host, but also he also pitched this guest today. So he got roped in by pitching the guest. He got roped into co-hosting. So Josh Jackson, that's Josh J at theaiassociation.org. Is that correct? Did I get that right, Josh?
Yeah, you got that right. Perfect.
All right. So thank you all. Stay tuned for episode 100. We're probably 2 weeks out from that, and then we will take a break for the fall. Thank you, Anthony, for being here. Thank you, Josh. Don't disappear when we stop recording. Thank you.